for that. So a really interesting session coming up now as well. In case anybody's keeping track, it is 2021, and we have had diversity movements pushing for equality of representation and for an end to patriarchal influence in everything from film and entertainment to politics and academia. But what about medical research? So the studies and stats are out there. Women are vastly underrepresented in medical studies, and it has a huge effect on health outcomes. Our expert panelists say sports science is ready to step up with a solution. Please welcome, in conversation with the founder of Voyagers, David Rowan, we have the founder of Orreco, Brian Moore, Orreco's head of sports science research, Georgie Bruinvels, and 10-time Olympian for Team USA, Allison Schmitt. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm David Rowan. I run the Voyagers health tech community, and I used to run Wired in the UK, where we became obsessed with how data could transform human performance, machine performance, health. We're lucky now with some experts who are using data to transform sporting performance, but particularly for women as well as men. And we're talking about whether health research has failed women. We have a super performing woman Olympian. So Allison Schmitt has been representing the US at 4 Olympics, has won 10 medals. We're going to talk to Allison a bit about what she's learned. Now she's able to gather all sorts of new levels of performance data. Because there's a company based in Galway and Ireland called Orreco that Brian Moore here runs. And Orreco has been working for more than a decade with elite athletes. And in the Tokyo Olympics, it worked with about 100 sports people. And if it was a country, the medals that these sports people won would have made you, I think, 14th in the league table. But nothing happens without scientists. And Georgie Bruinvels is the sports scientist, the senior sports scientist at Orreco, who's published widely on aspects of female athletes' performance. And I'm going to start, Georgie, asking you, how are women different from men?
That's a great question. So actually, there are many different ways in which women are different from men. Obviously, we know women have menstrual cycles, but actually anatomically, physiologically, even psychologically, women really are different from men. So we talk about different respiratory systems, cardiovascular systems, musculature, so the way women develop muscle is different to men. That results in different biomechanics, different movement patterns. I think the last year with COVID, we've seen different effects with COVID, with the virus in women compared to men. So really fundamentally, immunologically, there are many, many differences. And for years and years, we've just thought that women and men are actually the same, bar the fact that women have a slightly different reproductive system. But really over time and over the last 20, 30 years, we finally appreciated that there are fundamental differences. But actually, in the past, we've just assumed that they were the same, so research wasn't done on women. So, for example, we know that 80% of medical drugs are withdrawn from the market in the US through to side effects on women because they were never tested in women. We're really trying to change this gap and really drive the research forward, and clearly that needs to be done.
So the clinical research isn't working with women as much as men. I guess more of the researchers are male and they're biased towards people like them. But what are we learning now? The science is showing us that there's data sets that show you how to train women athletes. What are we learning to measure? Presumably monthly cycles and hormones are part of it, but when you are helping advise professionals, what are you counting? What are you looking at?
Yeah, great question. So So yes, the menstrual cycle and the hormonal patterns through all aspects of female health, so whether it's kind of pre-puberty, menstrual cycle, pre-partum, postpartum, menopause, but there's so many factors that go into that system being regular and I guess the system working properly. So whether it's sleep, whether it's blood testing, whether it's GPS data, so how much you're moving and exercising, whether it's nutrition, whether it's psychological factors. There's really so many different kind of elements which combine to influence how the body is responding, but also this hormonal pattern also influences all of those different factors. And getting them all right is essential to be a high-performing athlete, but also to high-perform in any aspect of your life. And I think one big thing that we're driving at Orreco, and I'm hugely fortunate to be part of, is a system and a way to integrate all of that to inform and to help every person out there be the best they can be. We need to take away these barriers and work with them and actually combine them together to help that optimal performance in all aspects across our lives.
Allison Schmitt, you have demonstrated what being the best you can be looks like. You've reached the top of the game. You move in the swimming pool like nobody. But for a long time, you were training essentially blind because you weren't collecting data. Now, I know for the last couple of years, you've been working with the Orreco team and optimizing for what the data was showing. Talk us through what you've been discovering and how you've changed your training routine.
So in 2010, at age 20, I was anemic, and obviously that's not going to put you at your best performance. So I was given two options: to continue to be anemic or get on birth control. Those are the only two options I had, so obviously wanting to perform, I go on birth control. I'm on birth control for then the next 8 years. Once I met Team Orreco and realized how powerful female hormones are and how we can use that to better perform and use that to our benefit, not train like we're men. Society tells us men are faster and stronger. And yes, they are, but women are also have superpowers, and our hormones can contest to that can help us in performance. And I'm grateful for the team that has helped me at 30 years old have that education and help that in my performance.
So it's not simply that the hormones in the menstrual cycle hinder performance, but you can actually use them to your advantage at the right part of the curve.
Yes, it's, I think talking about menstrual cycles and periods and hormones is a taboo subject. No one wants to talk about it. We want to forget about that. Who wants to talk about a period? Who wants to talk about your bad days? All of that is a taboo subject. But if we embrace the fact that we are females, that we do have hormones, we do menstruate, we're able to use that to our benefit and not only better perform, but have a better lifestyle now as an athlete and also as I get older.
So Allison, you're superb at breaking taboos. You've also helped break the taboo about athletes not talking about their mental health. But let's talk about the taboo of women athletes needing different kind of recognition, different kind of training programs to men. What do you think the professional sporting bodies should be doing that they haven't been doing?
Talk about hormones, talk about your period, talk about your phases. We were talking earlier how one training cycle, you can have the best training cycle, a week later be in a different phase in your menstrual cycle, and just be slower. As perfectionists, as elite athletes, we want to be better and better every single time we perform, but that's not necessarily possible when we're looking at the different hormones and the waves that the hormones go in, so the different phases, and just embracing that instead of putting ourselves into a hole and digging ourselves deeper into a hole because we aren't able to perform as well in that phase.
Brian Moore, at Orreco, you've worked with a couple of thousand elite athletes. You've got a team which includes lots of scientists, 17 PhDs, I think, 300 peer-reviewed papers. let's break down what it is specifically that you can measure that helps athletes like Allison perform better.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be surrounded by greatness. I've got superstar science and superstar athlete, and it's the combination of the two. So we're really all about any data that gives us robust, reliable, reproducible evidence to help us quantify performance. And at the very highest level, there's very small margins. And sometimes we can feel like the elite athletes are almost superhuman. They're very removed from us, but really it's physiology and very finely tuned. So we've helped them find a balance between, we all have to work very hard to get better. We've all had a situation where we've worked extremely hard before we got on holidays, and then we get sick just after that because we're stressed and we're under pressure. So what we do is we take all the output from as many available data sources for Allison, her sleep data, her menstrual cycle tracking data, lactate data from the pool, performance data, and map it all together to help advise her on the next possible best action. So what's the one thing I can do next to help me get better? Because I'm sure we're all the same. Sometimes it's overwhelming, the amount of data that we're dealing with. So we try to bring it back to a really simple input, whether it's measuring the biomarkers, look at antioxidant levels in the blood, understanding how the impact of sleep on recovery, and then give the coach information to make the decision for the next training session. So it's a combination of all those different inputs.
So we're not talking about simply having a nice wearable and the odd bit of blood being taken. From what I understand, you use everything from applied physiology to biostatistics to cognitive computing, and you're tracking people's sleep and travel, but also using GPS trackers. And you mentioned the word biomarkers. That, I suppose, breaks down into taking particular measurements from inside the blood that indicate too little iron, too much of something else. Are we able to gather more of these data points than we were a few years ago? And kind of where does this lead? Where does this go next?
It's all about optimization. I suppose I grew up passionate about sports and ended up living and training with Kenyan athletes for a year. And I figured out pretty quickly if I was going to be running against these athletes for my lunch, I was going to be very hungry, so I need to get better at something else. So I went into the science side, and I think the more we evolve, like everything from the gut microbiome, from genomic data, from contextual data, these numbers are really helpful, but once you understand the context, and we're not trying to act on every piece of information, but build it into a story to make us make the right decision at the right time, because it's very high stakes. Allison was competing. She had 3 months to prepare for the Olympic trials. She hadn't been in a pool. She was right on the line between, because you've got to get better, you have to push very hard. That fine line between pushing so hard to get better and then you overreach, and that knock-on effect on your immunology, on everything on your recovery. So it's really, I think it's all about optimization, and can we make better decisions to help us to make the best use of the most precious thing we all have, which is time. And for an athlete, it's to cover that distance in the shortest amount of time possible.
And just to give an idea of how widely your research is being used among elite athletes, you may be a startup out of Galway, but you have a California office, a London office. You're working with people like Mark Cuban's Dallas Mavericks. I think you've been associated with UK football teams like Newcastle United. What do you claim to offer them, not simply the female athletes?
Sure. Well, I suppose the beautiful thing about sport is it's ruthless. And if you don't add any value, you're gone very, very quickly. So we've developed a platform called Athlete that pulls all the information in one place. It syncs with the coach app, so the coach has an understanding where the player is, and then again make those decisions around the GPS data or the heart rate data, etc. So really we're about trying to help the players perform for as long as possible and to prolong their playing career. As an elite athlete or a professional player, earn more money. And one of the things we saw, it was Georgie that really brought it to my attention about how far behind the gap was in terms of what we really didn't understand, we were paying lip service to with a female athlete. So yeah, for us the biggest compliment is that our clients retain us year on year, and Mark, as you said, Mark Cuban invests deeply in analytics, and also an athlete will figure out very, very quickly if you don't know what you're talking about.
So you said you can help them earn more money. do they use this data when negotiating their contracts?
Yeah, we've supported athletes and their agents, giving them information. Again, it's just a part of the picture. But for example, if you're trying to make a decision about a player, and if they're showing that they're investing in their body and that they're performing at a level that that they've fewer miles on the clock, then that's only going to help the athlete.
Georgie, the science papers that your team and you have been publishing, are pretty deep level stuff. This is a couple of titles of papers that your team put out. The impact of heavy menstrual bleeding among athletes of the 2015 London Marathon, using functional data analysis to summarize and interpret lactate curves. I mean, we're sounding like we're deep in the lab here. How do we get this knowledge beyond the very, very high-level athletes? How do we make this useful to everybody else?
Yeah, and you've hit on passion point number one, really. Yeah, I think it's all well and good us sitting in our lab and coming up with all these really interesting statistics. And I think, as I highlighted earlier, like women's sport and understanding around looking after women and the female athlete has historically been lacking. But times are changing, and I'm really fortunate to be working at Orreco, where we are investing in a PhD kind of series of programs to really drive this research forward. But alongside that, we in 2018 launched an app called Fitter Women app, and it's a free app to download. And the aim of that is literally to get knowledge and education into every woman's hands. As I said before, there's 3.9 billion women out there, and across the female whole life cycle, we know that on average, women menstruate for approximately 30 to 40 years. So actually, there is a lot of time for them to really understand and to have to deal with the menstrual cycle. We know that typically the average woman loses about 1 day of productivity per menstrual cycle. So over the female life cycle, that's around a year of time that they're losing productivity in their lives. Think of the last year, we've lost productivity from COVID. We've lost around a year, maybe a year and a half. Well, that's just normal for a woman, which is crazy. So our aim with our platform is to really drive home education. We know that girls are dropping out from sport at twice the rate of boys. We know that more than ever, that health is now on the agenda. The importance of fitness and health is so key for managing infections, but also for just living a healthy, happy lifestyle. We know the importance or the link between mental health and being physically active. So I think from our side, we do this research to change people's lives and to turn that into actions, to drive home, how you can keep girls and women in physical activity, what to do from a nutrition perspective, how to manage menstrual cycle symptoms. And I think the key thing here is this knowledge needs to be power. We need to not provide knowledge to disable people. We need to provide it to enable people, to charge them with that ability to know what to do, how to look after themselves. And obviously Allison is the prime kind of elite athlete that is driving that alongside other colleagues, but actually it's across that whole life cycle, down to a grassroots level for every woman out there. We need to translate that into actions. And so, yeah, our Fit Women app is our way that we're doing that, but we're also trying to, drive more research, as I said before, and get education into schools and all of that kind of thing.
This is not simply for competitive athletes.
No,
You're
it's for
suggesting
everyone, yeah.
that people in the business world, people in public life, people running startups should be
100%.
tracking their body's performance.
Absolutely, and tracking it with a view to learning about you. Everyone's different, so learning about you and what works for you, but we know things like diet, stress, sleep can all have such a strong impact on the way your menstrual cycle presents. For example, in the last year, again, with the stresses of COVID, I've seen so many people with more painful periods, heavier bleeding, or really irregular periods. And that's just, the menstrual cycle is that inner dial. It's that inner dial that gives us the edge in a way. So it should be our thing that we use to understand what's going on in our body, but also there's so much you can do about it. You need to manage your symptoms and help yourself be the best you can be in your family life, in your work life, in your sporting life. but it's all about learning. Don't just, obviously there's so many historical social constructs about not discussing this area and the taboo nature of it, but why are we ignoring the elephant in the room that's there? I know, I've been there myself, I haven't wanted to speak about it. I'm sure Allison can attest to awkward conversations with her coach, but you just got to have it. We've got to normalize this area and then use it positively. We shouldn't be afraid of it.
Breaking taboos, Allison, it's the second best thing you're good at after winning medals. I saw that during the Tokyo Olympics, you tweeted, "Just a friendly reminder, Olympians are humans too." And you've also famously gone out and said it's okay to not be okay. It seems like you're trying to take this iconic idea of the athlete and humanize them, not simply in terms of the hormones running around their blood, but the mental challenges of being at the top of the game.
Yeah, I mean, being a female, even sitting in a white chair, I think there's many females out there that when they're menstruating, they don't want to be sitting in a white chair because who knows if you're going to leak. It's a topic no one talks about. Mental health is a topic no one talks about. It's okay to ask for help. All of that is correlated together, and working with this team, I've really realized that and embraced that we can use the female body to empower, to use our hormones and know that we can be powerful, just as powerful as men can be, and talk about those amongst each other. Whether, like Georgie said, no one wants to talk about them. Society has made a negative connotation around periods and mental health, but we're here to empower others to continue talking about it and change that conversation to a positive light.
So, you're a role model, Allison.
Thank you.
You have an amazing audience of people who get shit done. What would you like to ask them to do? You can make a call to action here at the Web Summit.
To be human, to talk about real life events. I think it's very easy, especially in front of media, in front of other people, to put a face on. But it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about those subjects that make you uncomfortable, because I think everyone here knows that being uncomfortable is where you see the most growth.
It's very persuasive. Last question. Last question to you, Brian. Last year, about $1.4 billion was invested in the sports tech world. It's a boom area. And femtech is a new hot sector for tech. So there's clearly a lot of expectation of revenue. You're not going to make a decacorn or a unicorn just working with professional athletes. What's your vision for Orreco in the future?
Well, ultimately we want to scale what we're doing with the best of the best and make that information available to us all, so that we effectively have an Olympic coach in our pockets. We've committed to making this core information around the female athlete for free forever, and the more we learn about the elites, that we can share with as many people as possible. So we're blessed that we've investment from True Ventures, who were the first into Fitbit and Peloton, and they see what we have developed and see how we can really scale globally. So it's a hugely exciting time. I think if you look at what's happening with Angel City in LA, with women's sport generally, the profile is increasing, but it's only about time that the female athletes get the respect that they deserve, and we're just thrilled to be a part of it, and to work with scientists, amazing scientists like Georgie, and amazing athletes like Allison. They say you're the sum of the people you surround yourself with, so I'm hanging on by my coattails, really. So,
could this be the Peloton of menstrual cycle tracking? We will find out. Thank you very much, Allison Schmitt, Brian Moore, and Georgie Bruinvels.
Thank you very much.